Hello, everyone. Good day. Welcome to our class. This is SS031, Understanding the Self. And this is Sir E, your online facilitator, your class instructor. And today, our discussion will be concentrating on the political self. This is a very famed words coming from Carlos P. Romulo in his I Walk with Heroes when he said, "To do my best to increase and never lessen my country's pride was the underlying motivation of all I might attempt. I had to be outstanding, to make the greatest effort to win, to prove I was capable not in spite of having been born Filipino, but because I was a Filipino." These are the words again of great Carlos P. Romulo. And today, our discussion will be concentrating on the political self. And so, with this saying, these are the things that we need to accomplish today. Number one, we will develop a consciousness for the Filipino identity, values, traits, community, and institutional factors. Also, we'll try to establish a democratic culture. And lastly, take responsibility for knowing and being a Filipino. Now, we have to understand that a complete and a comprehensive idea of a Filipino identity is not easy for us to have because the rich culture, each set and subset of people living within the Philippines, somehow gives us a difference of how we think of ourselves, particularly because of the ethnic divisions and differentiations and variations that we do have. Say, for example, if we ask which is a cultural identity of a certain group of people here, say of Ilocanos or the Mangyans, then there would be a readily available answer for that. But to ask who is a Filipino as a national identity, that takes a lot of digging of the past. Because history has shown us how Filipino identity has evolved from the pre-colonial period of time when we were not colonized yet to the colonial period and the post-colonial period, which is at present. We were shaped by the wars and powers that usurped our land. That bowing down to their definition of who we are seems to be the recourse. Now, in the process of acceptance, we have forgotten we are. The current movement towards threatening that thin and vulnerable definition that we have come up with. Now, the Filipinos' resilience and our adaptability made us embrace others' cultures, showing aside our tradition, values, and even somewhat our identity. This is very much pronounced so as we all are in search for our political self. Now, according to the 1987 Philippine Constitution, these are the citizens of the Philippines. Number one, those who are citizens of the Philippines at the time of the adoption of this constitution, meaning we are referring to the 1987 Philippine Constitution, also called as the Freedom Constitution or the Aquino Cori Constitution. Number two, those whose fathers or mothers are citizens of the Philippines. Since our parents, most of us perhaps, if not all, since most of our parents are born as Filipinos, are Filipino citizens, then we are Filipino citizens. And also those who are born January 17, 1973, of Filipino mothers who elect Philippine citizenship upon reaching the age of majority. And number four, those who are naturalized in accordance of law, meaning they are not Filipinos by birth, not having Filipino parents, but they chose to be Filipinos instead. Now, such identification is actually enshrined in the Constitution, and this is very helpful. But the challenge is how far and up to what extent do we feel this citizenship? When we say, I am a Filipino citizen, that does not necessarily translate to being a Filipino national because the question is there a sense of nationalism that we can truly and proudly say, I am a Filipino and the Philippines is my homeland? Unfortunately, that is a technical definition and might not translate to our beliefs and traditions, especially when we go deep to the marginalized Filipinos. And so our discussion today will focus on the perception of Filipinos regarding our role in the political arena. This will also discuss topics that need to be clarified. Some questions that will be answered would be What is the general consensus regarding the Filipino identity? In our journey towards Filipino nationalism, is it possible? And are we embracing the different cultures that we have? What should be done to establish a real and strong Filipino nationalism? Now, let's go back through history. Now, the role of the young people cannot be ignored in the shaping of our identity, for it is from their ranks where Rizal came from. We know that Dr. Jose Rizal was a person of enlightened education, one of the ilustrados, whose heightened conscience made it difficult for him to forget the poor plight of his people. We also know that at an early age, his genius made him cognizant or understanding of the racial disparity, the difference demonstrated towards the Filipinos at a time when they were called the derogatory term Indio, which means stupid, barbaric, idiotic, as claimed by the Spanish colonizers. Searching the annals of the historical books will support these that the Filipinos are actually not Indios. No, the Rizal have even reached England for that investigation. It was there that he discovered Antonio de Morga's book, which he later annotated at a time and corrected the errors committed by the Spanish chronicler regarding his understanding of Filipino practices, of the people, and its traditions. According to the historian Leon Maria Guerrero, Rizal actually had what we call as racial jealousy. Now, this race jealousy gave Rizal an impassioned pursuit towards proving that Filipinos are not Indios and that they are a race worthy of being given equal opportunity and freedom as that of its colonizer. Thus, at a time when the use of the term Filipino was reserved only for the elites, Dr. Rizal had the temerity, the passion to use it officially in his article, The Indolence of the Filipino People. That was one of his famous writings. It was a bold move for Rizal. It successfully announced that we are Filipinos and that we are not Indios. Because of this, people soon followed his example and we finally called ourselves as Filipinos, having our own identity. Now, these trickles of changes paved the way for a baptism and a change of title from Indios to Filipinos. Now, we have come a long way since then. The Americans defeated the Spaniards, and then after that, the Americans helped us, colonized us, if we may say. But then again, it was put into a halt because of the Second World War, where the Japanese occupation came. And then after the Second World War, the Americans again helped us to have our own independence by virtue of the Commonwealth Republic. For the Americans, they are giving us a favor by staying here, as they say, and use the idea of benevolent assimilation to validate why they have to stay here in the Philippines. The public system, in in what they would rather do in the declaration of their continued presence, they gave this as one of the reasons to establish a public school system because they believe that the Filipinos were not that educated, and so they have to establish a public school system which would cure the Filipino of his laziness and prepare him for a large participation in the affairs of the government. Then finally came our independence. Now, one administration after another have tested the survival instincts of Filipinos. Democracy has been challenged, especially during the time of Marcos. When EDSA revolution broke out, the democratization took another turn. It was Benigno Aquino Jr. who said the Filipinos are worth dying for. That was the battle cry that sought to inspire a hurting and far from recovering nation. Since then, there was almost a possessive attitude towards the concept of democracy. Now, the inception of democracy was derived from the colonizers, particularly the Americans' traditions, and continued by the elite. This ideology was handed to us by the Americans, and we have been taught to pattern ourselves according to their brand government. This is not really a good start because we have a kind of political system that did not grow from the political will of the ordinary people. Because again, if we are going to speak and talk about true democracy, we have to understand that true democracy is the rule of the people. Therefore, there is a need to rewrite our definition of democracy. It has to be a definition that will tell us this is our government, written by the sweat of its people and guarded by their hearts. At present, we have been making a movement towards a grassroots concept of democracy, but this will only be possible if the masses of poor people and uneducated will find their voice. Okay, now what we face today is a people who embrace the ideology of democracy. However, the problem lies in how we can translate this idea into everyday practice so that people can fully appreciate it. Now, according to the Article 2, Section 5 of the 1987 Philippine Constitution, which states the maintenance of the peace and order, the protection of life, liberty, and property, and the promotion of the general welfare are essentially for the enjoyment by all people of the blessings of democracy. Three things that should be provided by the government for us Filipinos to actually say that we are enjoying democracy are the following. The first one, maintenance of peace and order. Second, the protection of life, liberty, and property. So you talk about the division of uh, the Bill of Rights, which is in the third article of the 1987 Philippine Constitution, thus spoken in the second part, which is the protection of life, liberty, and property. And lastly, the promotion of the general welfare. Okay? Now, we demand as a citizen, okay, enjoying the full rights provided by the Constitution, that we must have all these three rights: life, liberty, and property, peace and order, and the promotion of our general welfare. Otherwise, we may not be able to fulfill our role as a citizen in a democratic setting. If we cannot have these three, then we will not be able to reach our full potential and make a clear definition of our political self. The absence of those three may create the lack of empathy towards nationhood. Now, a major part of such a fulfillment is a general consensus coming from the Filipinos that first, we should be able to participate and be heard in the political process. Secondly, there must be a consistency in the principles and policies declared in the Constitution and in how Filipinos live their lives. Okay? That is what we call. Thus, if we say we have democracy, then we should also say that there is peace and order. My life, liberty, and property are protected, and the general welfare is promoted. But before we can claim our rights, most Filipinos are also aware that there are duties to be performed as well. As to what kind of duties they are, there are variations of answers. According to a study done entitled The Contemporary Philippine Value, there are general agreements, okay, of situations like standing when the national anthem is being played, awareness of community affairs, and payment of taxes. However, diversity also manifested itself in certain situations like family needs versus those of societal needs and how public property should be treated. An image of the typical good citizen was drawn by Jokno, which says that a typical good citizen should be what? A diligent taxpayer, an honest voter, one who follows the traffic rules and others. Now, aside from that, one also has to know how to assert one's rights and defend those who cannot defend themselves, cares for the environment, and honors equality between men. Another finding made during the project was the consensus regarding redistributive democracy. Let me repeat that: redistributive democracy. There is a clamor to have a better redistribution of resources and capabilities, particularly land, income, and wealth. Now, there are culturally two categories of communities in the Philippines. The first one is what we call as the minority. Now, when we speak of the minority, they are the culturally, ethnically, or racially distinct groups that coexist, but is subordinate to a more dominant group. It's like a subculture in a particular larger culture. So if you're going to look at your screen right now, you will see here the ethnicity in the Philippines according to CIA World Fact Book. If you were going to look at this one, you will see that we are dominated. The Philippines is dominated by the Tagalogs, next by the Cebuanos, and then the Ilocanos, and then the Binisaya or the Bisaya, and then the Hiligaynon or the Ilonggos, and then the Bicolanos, and then Waray. And then part of the minority perhaps are those 25.3% who are not included in these bigger ethnicities in the Philippines. Now, they are considered as the minority group. Now, when we speak of the majority, it would often be characterized by the Tagalog. As we say, we are predominantly Tagalog, characterized by Tagalog English speakers, and with Christianity or Catholicism as the basis of our faith, knowing that Filipinos are predominantly Catholic in our faith. Okay, so that's one thing that we have to understand. Now, as for our citizenship, the perception was almost the same as the definition given by March and Olson, an identity defined by a bundle of rights and duties and by an awareness of others in a similar position. Now, let's look at this one. How do we develop a democratic culture as suggested by Zialcita? In order for us to establish a democratic culture, the following values are necessary. Number one, we should respect. There should be a respect for and affirmation of the individual. Now, this entails recognizing that every individual has inherent rights. So, when you talk about inherent rights, say, for example, the right to life is an inherent life. Okay? Thus, we say that one's right to life ends where another person's right begins. Thus, we say that one's right ends where another person's right begins. We have to respect the rights of every individual. Second one, recognition of the inherent dignity of all human beings. Now, once recognition is made of such dignity, then it is easier for us to treat people as ends in themselves and not use them as a means towards their own selfish ambitions. Number three, concern for the public good. We must understand with the three above. We must understand with the okay, the three above. This is very important. Okay, concern for the public good. We must understand that our individual rights are also limited by the power of the state. There is no such thing as absolute freedom. Okay, let me repeat that. There is no such thing as absolute freedom because our freedom has to be regulated and limited as well by the power of the state. The welfare of the state is considered together with the civil rights. And lastly, willingness to listen to others. Now, this is consistent with numbers one, two, and three. If we respect the individual, then we should be giving time to listen and understand the claim of that individual. All these imply the need for us to help the anonymous stranger, our fellows. That is more than our individual families. We should also involve and care for our nation. That should be a major part of our political identity. An identity closely tied to being a Filipino citizen in heart and in mind. In summary, from an investigation of our history, the search and definition of a truly Filipino identity has been marked with a lot of changes. But it is a challenge that we are willing to meet head on to ensure our survival as a nation. In this globalized age, it is easy to be swept away by modernization, but as long as we continue nurturing that search, we will be able to stand as one Filipino nation. That wraps up our discussion on the political self. Let us end this lecture by again reading what Carlos P. Romulo said in I Walked with Heroes. To do my best to increase and never lessen my country's pride was the underlying motivation of all I might attempt. Had to be outstanding, to make the greatest effort to win, to prove I was capable not in spite of having been born Filipino, but but because I was a Filipino. Thank you very much for joining me in our session for today. This has been Sir E, and this is SS31. Thank you for joining us. Thank you very much. God bless us all.